I want to start just with the basic question of tell us a little bit about your film and what led you to want to make this film. Katherine, yours is sort of an afternoon in Austin, Texas, but where you live. But what drew you to make this particular film?
It was sort of a mix of multiple things, but I would say it started with me wanting to explore process. I kind of wanted to do something less linear and with a narrative backbone, but working with non-professional actors and people that I just found compelling in Austin. And my younger brother was living with me at the time and going to the local high school, and I would see kids just in the front lawn of that high school that looked really compelling and cool. And I was like, I think I'm going to put them in a movie. And so I found some kids from Instagram and from his high school and sort of wrote moments that were inspired by them and stories that they had shared with me. And it's also a love letter to Austin and some of my favorite spots in the city, places that I thought would be beautiful to film. And that was sort of the genesis of the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a movie. I want to start just with the basic question of tell us a little bit about your film and what led you to want to make this film.
Really grateful that they said yes.
Michael, for you, I mean, this was all in the family. I mean, it's you going back to visit your father, but tell us a little more about it and what led you to want to make this film.
Yeah, so my film is kind of a slow meditative film about my dad, and I kind of got into it because I helped him digitize a bunch of home video footage, and I was watching it while I was away, and it was really emotionally moving to me, and I was starting to make connections between him kind of documenting this time in our life that he knew wouldn't last, as kind of like a desperate attempt to create a narrative for his life before it was over. And I kind of like saw myself also like trying to narrativize like his understanding of the world. And so I kind of started from that, and I also started from being limited by basically being home during the pandemic and not being able to like make any other film than with my dad, and I was already helping take care of him. So yeah, so I just used that as a limitation, and then also really an excuse to explore his past and my past and like have an excuse to understand him better, and through that understand myself.
Is it uncomfortable making a film that is basically, just you and your dad and your family?
Yeah, incredibly. Yeah. That was kind of excruciating. But yeah, it was good. I mean, I also kind of realized like what my filmmaking voice is as far as like what a personal film is, and I played a lot with how much I would be in the film or not, and I ended up taking myself out of it a lot. I realized that like my dad is such a great documentary character because he's unapologetically himself. He can't change who he is based off of if the camera's on or not. And he's so expressive and deep and emotional. And I think a lot of the times when I was on screen, at least when I was like looking at it, I was like, yeah, you're not being yourself, dude. So, it was just like turning off director brain was kind of like impossible for me. So I was like both trying to be a present son and also like worrying about the batteries because because of the pandemic, and because of the intimacy of the subject, I did everything myself. So I did the sound. I was shooting while I was also in the frame. And so it created a lot of kind of logistical problems that also I think like added to the look and feel of the film and also the intimacy in it. So yeah.
Amy, what about you? What led you to, I mean, this is an animated documentary about a young woman who, when she was 14, had to flee her home in Congo. What led you to her and to her story?
Like Katherine, I'm living in Texas, and immigration has been a topic of conversation for a long time. And with Trump taking office, it became intensified. So this is the second animated documentary that I've made featuring a female protagonist. And how I found Mugeni was through a resettlement agency based in Michigan. I reached out and shared my previous film with them and said I'm really interested in doing another one of these because people seem to be really moved by hearing a personal account from a young person on what it was like to flee violence unexpectedly and try to create a new home and try to rebuild family. And he introduced me to Mugeni. He had been speaking with her about doing an op-ed about sharing her story. She was 19 at the time, and she was really distraught at the rhetoric coming out of the White House at the time and wanted people to open their hearts and minds to people like her, like people that you see in the film did. So we met on the phone, and then I flew to meet her a month later in January of 2020, and then we made the film during the pandemic.
What is it about the medium of animation that makes it the right way to tell this story, do you think?
I feel like because rather it's focusing on the details of the journey, but also the emotional trajectory and also the memories that she has. I think animation allows you to go and bring an audience with you to all those places that you couldn't necessarily go otherwise. I find it's a really effective way to really internalize her story and identify and emote with her, be with her in a way that's rather intimate.
Giosuè, so you did the music for this documentary about a pair of elderly Asian grandmothers that we instantly fall in love with. How did you get involved? Were you involved early on, or how did you come onto that?
I had worked with Sean on other shorts, other projects that he did. Actually, the two ladies are Sean's grandmas. Spoiler alerts, they live together in the same house, and they're like super cool. And he convinced them to put up shows every time he goes up, and just pretty much what the film is Sean directing his grandmas. It's really funny. It's awesome. And working with Sean is great because we basically score the movie together. In a sense, like he's in the room while I'm writing, so there's a lot of back and forth, and it doesn't really happen that much for me because I tend to write on my own, and then I send it to the director, and they say, "This is terrible. Do it all over again." But with Sean, that happens too. But it happens in the same room, so I can change it immediately. I don't know if that answered your question. You know.
As a composer, how do you decide? Okay, what's the right sound for these characters?
It's really just trying a bunch of stuff and see what it sticks. But in this case, and Sean will not approve of me saying this, but the whole point.
Say it.
What I was trying to do here, I was trying to build like an orchestra that sounded like the grandmas were playing the instruments, and it actually just kind of sounds like that. Like there's a lot of weird notes, and tuning is really bad, and like we're using instruments that are not, the instruments are playing the role of other instruments. Like bass clarinet sounds like an upright bass, and like there's only one drum, literally only one drum that kind of just sounds like a drum set, but it's not a drum set. It's like grandma's trying to be cool. That's what that is. And it worked for, he said yes, so we approved it.
So Jalena, what was the genesis of Rest Stop, which is sort of this journey where so much happens kind of between the lines?
Yeah, so Rest Stop is a premature coming-of-age story that follows May, who's a young Ugandan-American girl, and she goes with her mom and her siblings on a journey from Albany, New York, down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to reunite their family. And I was so, grateful and honored to be a producer of the film. It's written and directed by the extremely talented Crystal Kaiza and produced by myself and Britt Fryer. It's producerially a very challenging film because it's a road trip movie. In the script, it's 5 different states that they're going through. And we pitched it in the height of the pandemic in 2020, and we participated in Tribeca Through Her Lens. And Crystal did such a good job of selling the vision, and then everyone was like, but how are you going to make this movie? But we ended up filming it all in the capital region, so in Albany and around there, and just being able to kind of dress things to look a little bit different and play with our background actors and the texture to have those distinct kind of looks. And then, as you said, it's
like I love Crystal's work and she's one of my closest friends, and I just think her nuance and subtlety and way of showing just so much depth, especially in female relationships, is really, really beautiful.
Right. I mean, I feel like things like watching the lead actress on the phone with the guy she's going to see, and she doesn't have to say anything. We're hearing his voice, but just like, you know, the looks on her face tell you the history of that relationship.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that scene is that was like one of our most chaotic days of filming, because we were able to like shut down the Albany bus station for only a few hours, but it's a very crowded bus station, and only because of COVID it was even shutting down, whereas usually it's open 24 hours. So there was all sorts of people right around there, and it was a lot going on, but it turned out really beautifully, and everyone did such a great job.
Luchina, tell us how you came to Team Dream. I mean, talk about, you know, you've got another pair of you know, elderly women that we fall in love with. Only they're competitive swimmers. I mean, how did you encounter them, and why did you see a film there?
Oh my God! When you meet Anne and Madeline, you know they're like Thelma and Louise. You know, they have this great friendship, but they're also really competitive. They became athletes in retirement, which I think is really cool. But before that, they were these very accomplished women. They'd done amazing things in their lives, and they really understood that life doesn't end after a certain age, and to keep growing and stay energetic and connected, you have to have a passion and you have to have community. And so they are aging gracefully, and you know, they're just incredible examples. I met them actually through their coach, who is a good friend of mine, for some 30 plus years. And when he told me about them, I said, oh yeah, they're a film.
I mean, we're following them in the lead up to a competition. Were you confident all along that you had a film regardless of what happened at this competition?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always wanted to make a sports film. And so I just thought, oh yeah, we need to show them as the athletes that they really are. I mean, they take this stuff seriously. They're very strong. When I went to the games, I literally met a woman whose 100th birthday was the following month. She hopped out of the pool, didn't go up the steps to the side. She hopped out. So that's the caliber of talent that they were up against. And I just knew that irregardless of what happened, and yes, Madeline was ready. She wanted that medal. And Anne, she's just like, I just want to finish, you know? And the ironic thing is that she's the one who came away with the medals. And we honestly thought, as we were starting the film, Anne was the character that we were going to, you know, really be invested in. But it became Madeline. It became Madeline's journey of, you know, watching when you're reaching for something, but you don't quite get there. And you just have to be okay with that. And that's the journey of many of us. So I just think, you know, I learned so much from making that film, but I continue to learn from them as I watch it, as we are on the circuit together. You know, they're just really inspiring when it comes to, you know, never giving up. In fact, they would be here, but they're competing tomorrow in Pittsburgh at the National Senior Games.
Nate, when the LAPD blows up your neighborhood, I mean, is basically exactly what the title says. I mean, it's something that happened in Los Angeles a couple of years ago, where they blew up fireworks and took the neighborhood with. I mean, what made you think, okay, I want to do a movie there?
I made a couple of other archival films along the same lines of like really dumb, like American hubris sorts of things. And so I'm always looking for, I guess, like very visual archival elements that are told through the local news. And the day this happened, you know, I always read the local news in Los Angeles, and I was paying attention and like actually watching like all of the videos of this happening, and I like immediately was like, oh, I have to make a film out of this. Like, and just follow the story.
So when you're telling it with nothing but archival footage, the news footage from the time, I mean, how long do you spend like collecting and watching every piece of news footage that was about this before you start, shaping things?
With this one specifically, there's the explosion that happened, and you just kind of start there. But we collected pretty much everything that we possibly could. There's Facebook Live, there's TikTok, there's local news, but everything is all local. There's no I guess we put the restrictions on of not using like national stuff, or I would kind of discount things from that would be like local news where they're like doing like the funny story at the end of the night in Detroit or whatever. Yeah, put those parameters in, but basically like just anything we could get our hands on, and just like reaching out to people and finding whatever was out there to like craft the story. Putting together a film like this, you try to look for all of those elements, and all those elements are kind of disparate, like the way the internet works now, and you see like snippets of the story, but like putting them all together, I think, is really like how you tell the whole story,
Yeah. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like to go down the row one more time and just, last night we had a dinner at Sharon's house, and one of the student filmmakers from UCLA was talking, and he was talking about making his film, and he said something about, well, you go in and things are going to happen. And it sort of struck a nerve chord with everybody. And so, tell me about the things that happened on your movie. I mean, what were the challenges that came up that you really feel like you had to work to overcome on your film?
I think for us, it was that we were shooting in Texas during the summer, so it was hot. And just being outside and the whole time was weathering the elements. I left a lot of room in the shoot to kind of leave room to find spontaneous moments and sort of have like documentary moments within the scripted circumstances. So some of my favorite moments were things that just happened spontaneously. Like there's a character in the film who says, like the secret to life is pain is the secret, or he says something like that. And I loved that he just randomly said that. And it was sort of a theme in the film. And so I guess being open to just things that happen that might, surprise you and match the theme of the film is kind of exciting.
I mean, I think the first one was probably just like, is this a film that somebody wants to watch? And I feel like it's hard to know if something's interesting, if it's personal, because you have such different experience of the that story if it's your own. But I think that the hardest part was just like navigating kind of like the ethical minefield of making a documentary with your family. And I still have I don't totally know how I feel about this film even existing, because I think it's a lot to ask of my dad. And I think making films about your family, I think my dad he agreed and consented to do this, but I think a lot of that has to do with him wanting to help me. He's an adult, he can make that decision, but also he's not necessarily oh, I want to tell my story and you're the vehicle to do it, son. It was more hey, can I put this awkward camera in the room and can we talk about some of the most challenging parts of our lives and then have people watch it. And so yeah, I think that's something that I wrestled with the whole time, and talking about really emotional and traumatic things with anybody, it's I think you're always butting up against am I going too far, And I was constantly questioning that the whole time. So that was really emotionally challenging and yeah, challenging from a filmmaking perspective.
In making this film, in interviewing Mugeni, she had to revisit a lot of trauma. And I think working within my own parameters, she lived in a different state and I had a limited amount of time. So it's the balance of making sure Mugeni was comfortable and supported and figuring out how to get details, but also have her open up in a relatively quick way was really tricky. And making sure that I wasn't pushing her too far. But she had a lot of people in the room with her, in the sound booth. And then I had a producer on the phone who was also listening for stories. So she sort of helped make sure we had everything. And I didn't know that a pandemic was about to happen. So we got really lucky that in those 2 days of interviews, which were only a few hours each, we got everything that we needed to complete the film. So I would say that, and then also trying to make a relatively short film, because animation is really time consuming and can be costly, to be able to encapsulate everything that I thought was important and that Mugeni would feel was important in that short amount of time was also tricky. I actually made the film longer once it was animated and just looped some things to give it a little more space.
For us, it was really about the balancing act of writing music that makes sense for the film. This movie really is about life and how in your older age, you're a little bit closer to death, but at the same time, like, grandmas are very cool and funny. So for us, it was like, how do we make this? How do we structure the music in the movie in a way that we want to explore all these themes without leaning too much into the emotional vibe of it, and still staying into the like quirkiness and lightheartedness of the whole story. So yeah, it was mostly that.
We had 2 kids and a baby on a moving bus in the end of July in upstate New York. So there was a lot of challenges, but one that we didn't really expect is how hard it was to hear each other when the bus was running. And even with walkies, like, it's still pretty hard to hear. And then masks and everything like that. So communication and just figuring out ways to communicate on set. And then since we did have kids, going into it, I thought that their parents were going to be, really like involved and very hands-on, but the moms were not at all. They were like, you take our kids. They were hanging out with each other, having a great time. And one time our assistant costume designer, actually, she gave the kids like too much candy. And you could tell they were reaching this threshold that we weren't going to be able to come back from. And I was like, you cannot give them any more candy. Like, don't feed these kids candy. But Crystal and myself and Britt, we all have experience in nonfiction also, and that's kind of where our background is. So we really wanted to bring like documentary ethics to narrative filmmaking and kind of bring this sense of family and community and play and fun into, this kind of world. And we wanted the kids to feel like they could have fun and they could do what they wanted. It didn't have to be stressful. And I was always like, it's lucky that being on set and being on a long bus ride, it's not that different. Like, there's a lot of waiting and there's a lot of sitting around to see what happens next. So it can be kind of like a real experience for them.
On that point, just as an aside, I really do feel like we've got 5 documentaries up here and we have 2 narrative films that really feel informed by nonfiction filmmaking in big ways. I mean, they both of your films feel like we're eavesdropping on real life, not that we're watching actors. Luchina, what were your challenges?
Yeah, I feel like Katherine, my challenge sort of also was reflected in the film, and it was time, the element of time. By the time we got the green light from Tribeca, this is a Queen Collective film, we had 2 or 3 weeks before the competition. So it was a race for us. The clock was ticking suddenly to pull together a crew, get on the phone with Anne and Madeline, calm them down about the fact that they were going to be in a bathing suit with no makeup throughout the film. And they hadn't met me. So trust me, I'm going to take good care of you. And as we got ready to go to Chicago, I was actually in Milwaukee judging the Milwaukee Film Festival and got COVID. So I ended up interviewing them from my bed in the hotel, propped up on pillows and sleeping in between. And, I was like, no, the show must go on. And we had to hire an extra PA just to walk me around on an iPad so I could see what they were shooting. And then I got down to Florida about a week later. So it was all a race against time. We had 5 weeks of edit because they wanted to get the film screened at the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. And we literally got it to them 2 days before. I slid into the audience and it was like 500 people in the room, and it occurred to me, oh my God, they're going to see this film that I've been making for weeks now, and it's been this race. And we sat down, and the audience was with us from the moment the film started and gave us a standing ovation at the end. And that was when I realized, like, something happened. Something happened, and it translated on screen. So that challenge of time actually, I think, pushed me in a very good way.
Nate, you got the final word here. What were your challenges?
I don't think that I really had many challenges in making the film, but you think about the challenges that the people in the film had, which was like the LA Times. So it was like the 2-year anniversary of the explosion 2 weeks ago. And there are still people displaced that are living in hotels in downtown LA. So you think about, just before the 4th of July, you're sitting in your house and the city blows it up, and then you have to live in a hotel for the past 2 years. So I guess the challenge that was presented to me was to tell that story, and hopefully everyone continues to follow it because it hasn't ended yet.
Well, thank you for telling the story, and thank all of you for telling the stories that you did. We're all, I think, better for having seen them.